First of all, I want to thank Dr. Julie Luker and Inver Hills for inviting me here to speak in front of you. It truly is an honor. Now, I have to tell you, and as I'm standing up here, I had this awesome speech written out about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I thought I had a great introduction, a great body, and a great conclusion. And I was reading it to a friend of mine that I grew up with in the Frogtown community. Her name's Corrine. And as I was done reading it to her, there was a long pause. And I thought she was starstruck. Quite honestly, I thought I left her speechless. And then next thing I know, she looks at me and says, I have to be honest with you. You're not sharing anything. And I paused for a second, thought to myself, I'm not sharing anything. I just spoke to you for 30 minutes. How can I talk about absolutely nothing for 30 minutes? She goes, you're not giving enough information about who you are. What you're doing is just going surface level. You're not getting deep. So I paused for a second, and I really thought about what the committee wanted from me. And I thought about the questions that they had asked me. So I looked at what they had written down, and I said, well, you know what? If I'm really going to address the questions about identity and how I see myself, my experience, how it relates to the title of the address, the Shop with Cop program, how I may have been an example to some folks and still be an example to others, and maybe even give you specific suggestions, then Corrine was right. I needed to go deeper. I couldn't just go surface level. Everything I was telling her was things that you could do an internet search on and find me. Which, by the way, if you ever get bored at work one day, do an internet search and see how your name pops up. Because I found a lot of things out about me that I didn't know were out there. And I could find where I lived and everything else. Trust me, do it, clear your name on a bunch of those things. So as I sat there and I looked at Corrine, I looked at her and I said, you know what? You understand what it's like. You grew up in the Frogtown community with me. You know what that environment was like. Now, you got to keep in mind, I hadn't seen Corrine in 35 years. We got set up on a random date, and I show up to the date and there she is. And I'm like, oh my God, really? I'm meeting you after 35 years? And it was just like we were back in the neighborhood talking like we had talked a long time ago. So I decided she's right. I'm going to share the story. I'm going to go deeper. If I'm going to answer the questions that the committee wants me to answer, then I have to do it fully and authentically, which means I have to talk about my past because that laid the foundation for who I am. Now, I could stand up here and give you numerous studies about experts telling you there's multiple ways that we can identify, whether it's my gender, my sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, educational background, national origin, religion. Julie gave you half of those, or my bad, Dr. Luker gave you half of those. So I'm not going to do that. Those are just boxes I get to check. And I'm happy growing up now. Growing up, I get to actually check the box Latino. When I was a kid, I had to check the other box. I didn't even have an ethnicity. So I'm happy, that they're expanding that. But those are boxes that I check. It doesn't tell your story, my story. It doesn't encapsulate who I am. And it doesn't talk about what I've been through, how I got up here, and how Frogtown shaped who I am as a person. Now, to this day, when people ask me where I'm from, I tell them I was born in Texas, but I grew up in the Frogtown community. This is the first house we lived in when we came up here. That's my grandma's house. She still lives in that house 45 years later. It came up here when I was 2 years old. So if I'm going to talk a little bit about Frogtown, you need to understand what Frogtown is and where it comes from.
Nestled behind Minnesota's state capital, Frogtown is located south of Minnehaha Avenue, north of University Avenue, west of Marion Street, and east of Victoria Street. There are two competing theories that describe the origin of the name Frogtown. Historically, frog was a derogatory name for early French settlers. Some believe that the high concentration of Frenchmen in the area led to the name Frogtown. Another common belief is that Frogtown was built on marshes, and at night the croaking of frogs could be heard. In the early 1800s, Frogtown was primarily an agricultural community. However, population density increased dramatically in the mid-1800s, with the construction of major roads and the development of the railroad system. During this time, Frogtown's residents were primarily European immigrants, with German, Polish, and Irish being the most common types of Europeans. The Frogtown neighborhood has experienced many changes over the years. It is currently one of the most diverse communities in St. Paul due to its rich history of immigration and working class roots. But until the 1970s, the majority of Frogtown's residents were white. According to the 1970 U.S. Census, 98% of the population was Caucasian, 0.5% was African American, and 1.5% was of other races. Over the years, the neighborhood began to drastically change. According to the 2000 census, only 27% of Frogtown's residents were Caucasian, 23% were African American, 39% were Asian, 9% were Latin, and 1.5% were Native American. Over the last 2 decades, Frogtown has experienced a period of disinvestment. With that disinvestment came a rise in criminal activity and a depreciation of property values. As longtime residents left the aging community, many of the existing homes were converted into rental properties, owned by absentee landlords. While the racial composition changed dramatically over the years, Frogtown remained a haven for recent immigrants. Although many of the homes were dilapidated and the living conditions were poor, these were often the only homes low-income families could afford in the city.
So that's a little bit about Frogtown and what I moved into. Now, the numbers will tell you Frogtown is still one of the more ethnically diverse communities in the city of St. Paul, but it also has an higher than average poverty rate and higher than average crime rate. But those are only numbers. And like a connect the dot puzzle, they just give you an outline, they don't tell you the story. Frogtown has always been a community of ethnically diverse backgrounds and working class families, and my parents moved there when I was only a year old. They came up here from Texas. They moved into my grandma's house on the corner of Charles and Western. They were migrant farm workers, and they came here to work the field in Anoka, and they lived with my grandma. Now, to this day, I don't know why my parents stayed, especially when it's snowing in April, and we didn't move back to Texas, but maybe I contributed to that. You see, my mom got laid off from her job, and they were sitting in the kitchen planning their trip back down to Texas to go back and visit, maybe see what was going on. And, I was a young child walking around in the kitchen, pulled myself up with a coffee pot cord and pulled a hot pot of coffee onto my back and ended up in the Ramsey burn unit with 2nd and 3rd degree burns on my back at 18 months of age. And my mom and dad had to stay there for 2 to 3 months with me while I got pigskin graft onto my back. Now, you can't see it now. I don't have pigskin on my back. It's a little scar, and I'm not going to show you because that's inappropriate. But who knows what would have happened if would have moved back? Who knows if I would have stayed here? Who knows where my career path would have gone? But I will tell you, staying in Frogtown is what shaped who I am today. Like I said, my parents were migrant farm workers. They had it hard. I'm talking in the 70s, they're picking in the fields at 10 cents a pound in Anoka, picking cotton. And if anybody lifted a pound of cotton, that's not a lot. But that's what my parents did. I wasn't old enough to remember a lot of that. For as long as I can remember, my parents always had shift jobs, 3 to 11. My dad, or as most people in the community knew him, was Pops. He worked at the University of Minnesota as a janitor. And he did that his whole career. My mom worked at the Fisher Nut Company until she got laid off when they decided to take her company and move it down to Mexico for cheap labor. The irony in that. The fact that, she worked her butt off to get out of the fields, get into a factory job, and then lost her job in the factory because they wanted to move it to Mexico for cheaper labor. Well, I will say the company did take care of her because they put her back into school so she could get her education. It was the first time I saw my mom proud about going back to school and getting educated. And I thought at the time that she was doing that to go back and get, a college degree. No, she was just going back to get her high school degree. See, my mom dropped out in 7th grade because she had 11 brothers and sisters. And she was the oldest. And my grandparents worked the evening shift, the overnight shift. So she would have to stay home during the day to raise her younger brothers and sisters so her parents could sleep and they could go back to work. So as you can imagine, with them working the overnight shift, I barely saw them. They were gone. I would go to school. By the time I came home, they're on their way out the door. And when the weekend came, I was usually out the door going out and hanging with my friends. So I didn't see my parents growing up. They were gone from 3 to 11. So what did that mean? It meant that raising my younger brothers and sisters fell on all of us. Now I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger brother. So when it first happened that I had to raise my younger brother at 12 years of age, I didn't say anything. I just went with it. You know, my sister did it at 18, and she raised us until she turned 18, moved out of the house. My older brother, it skipped him, but we all came to the conclusion at a very early age that he was a golden child, so he didn't have to do anything. He could get away with whatever he wanted, so he just took off on out the house. So my high school years consisted of me going to school, coming home, and raising my younger brother. If I wanted to play any sports or do anything else like that, I had to find a sitter for him. Was I upset? Yeah. All my friends are running around being teenagers, meeting people at the park, playing sports. But what was I to do? That's just the way it worked out. So I could sit there and wallow and cry and complain, but that wasn't unique to me. Everybody who grew up in that community had their own challenges and struggles. It didn't make a difference who you were or where you came from. But although we may have been from different backgrounds, ethnic, social, economic, or religious backgrounds, hold on a second. It didn't matter. We all struggled together. Now, these are pictures of my aunt and uncle and my dad working in the fields. You see, we recognized our differences, but we did not limit ourselves to that lens. Instead, we built bridges across them, and we defined ourselves on the relationships that we had with each other. I can tell you, though, at the time, my very first job as a community organizer came helping out my neighbors. I didn't think it was a big deal. I just remember one time some adults, which, by the way, today if an adult approached a young child, it'd be a lot different than it was in the 70s and 80s, just got to tell you that. But I had an older adult come up to me and just kind of talk to me and say, hey, can you bring a bunch of your friends down to the corner of Thomas and Avon? And I'm like, you mean the empty dirt field down there where the old elementary school used to stand? And they're like, yeah, just bring a bunch of your friends down there on a Saturday morning. We'd appreciate it. So we did. And I showed up there, we're playing football in a dirt field, and they're serving food and drinks, and finally somebody said, oh yeah, we're trying to demonstrate to the city here that this is where a park needs to be built in our community. Because Frogtown had very limited green space, so that's what we did. Helped out our neighbors. We showed up. Although it's been over 35 years since that happened, I can still remember the day I went into that park. And that park holds a lot of significance for me. That's where I grew up. That's my house. I got to tell you, whether it was gathering in the park or whether it was mowing the lawn next door for Mrs. Richter or running to the store for Mr. Hill to pick up a pack of Pall Mall cigarettes non-filtered without a note, I remember those things. And yes, that's the day we could just run down there, and a pack of cigarettes only cost 90 cents. So that just tells you how old I was. It didn't make a difference. It was an impromptu barbecue in the middle of the day with people smelling the food and wanting to bring over, a dish to share, or whether it was a Saturday night and your mom had decided to invite the mariachi band from the state fair to the house. And somebody's shaking their head because she lived 2 houses down from me, so she heard the noise. And nothing like coming home on a Saturday night and listening to the mariachi band playing in your backyard. And I will tell you, I got tired of the accordion. And I got tired of Mexican music during the summer. But that's the way it happened, and that's the way we rolled in Frogtown. It was an impromptu gathering. We did what we could for each other. It was about building up relationships, striking up a conversation with somebody in their front yard who would become a lifelong friend, a spontaneous game of football in the streets, which was pretty safe, or my good friend Roxy, driving through the neighborhood, stopping and sitting on our steps, talking the night away. I learned early on that although someone might appear different, it does not mean that they may not be able to relate to who you are or where you come from. You know, Frogtown taught me to take the time to get to know people. Find ways to listen to people's lived experience and find ways to bring more voices to the discussion that have a different perspective than my own. Because that is how you build community, is by bringing in as many people as you possibly can to the conversation. Now, I will tell you, I was much better younger looking. And yes, by the way, when people ask the question, that first picture is me. My parents decided not to cut my hair until I was almost 3 years old. And there's the picture of the mariachi band, not the exact same one. I will tell you, I would have stayed in Frogtown forever because that was my community. But as I got older, it took a dramatic turn.
When I got there, Frogtown, literally, you couldn't drive down some of the blocks for the dope dealers and some of the prostitutes that were working the area. It was not unusual at all for literally even a squad car, and I had an unmarked car, you would drive down Thomas, you would drive down E Block, and you would have to stop because the dope dealers were out, huddled around some car, half a block up, and everybody was kind of waiting for the dope transaction to get done so that people could drive through. And people didn't honk their horns because they were a little nervous about what the dope dealers would think if they were interrupting their dope deals. There were ladies walking down the streets. There were Johns driving up and down the streets in some cases, saying really ugly things to people.
There were crack houses in many parts of the neighborhood, and a lot of prostitution was still in the neighborhood. The Faust Theater, Dale, and University was still there, which had a lot of pornography and prostitution running out of it.
See, as I got older, Frogtown got the reputation for being a convenience store for prostitution and drugs. At the time, according to the St. Paul Police Department, a person living in Frogtown was 4 times the city average being a victim of a homicide and 10 times the city average for an aggravated assault. I can remember coming out my front door, getting ready to run to the bus stop, and finding a handgun laying there right in my front yard off of the front steps. I also remember coming out another day, and my next door neighbor had the words KKK spray painted across the front of his house. The neighborhood park that I played in had become a place for gangs to do their business, to drink and hang out. It turned. And I had the option to join those activities. And like some of my friends, for a period of time, I did. I wasn't thinking about college at all. My parents had done just okay with a high school diploma, and I was like, why not? And you know what, quite honestly, at 18, 19, it was a lot of fun. And the parties were fun. It didn't matter what I was doing, whether I was going out to eat, going on a shopping sprees, deciding on a spur of a moment to rent a limo to take a group of friends down to the casino and party away. I was about living life to the fullest. But I recognized the party wasn't going to last forever. I knew that. And that reality was one when you watch the 5 o'clock news and you see your uncle being hauled away in handcuffs after a drug bust. Or you read the Sunday paper to find out another one of your cousins has been tortured to death. Or after a night out of partying, you have to call your best friend's mom from the ER covered in his blood because he tried taking his own life. I knew something had to change while I still had options. I hadn't been incarcerated, and most importantly, I was still alive, so it was time for me to move on. I initially went to college not to make a difference in anybody's life but myself. I left because I wanted to get out. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew that I wanted to break the cycle that my family had been in, and education was going to be key. No one in my family before me had gone to college. Although I barely graduated high school, here I am at 19 years of age trying to figure out how to register myself and pay for it. So I did. And after attending a year's worth of college classes, not really fully embracing it because I didn't live on campus, I still lived in the neighborhood, occasionally dipping back and forth in and out of the life. I was walking across the bridge between the East and West Bank at the University of Minnesota, and there was a young woman handing out a flyer about a program called Project Motivation for the YM. Project Motivation was a program that pairs mentors with young kids from inner city neighborhoods like myself. Now, completely honest, I had no intentions about being a mentor right away. I just saw a really cute girl handing out flyers on the bridge. And you can shake all your head all you want, Julie, but you know this story and it's true. So my thought was, maybe she'll be at the meeting tonight. And maybe I'll be able to get a chance to meet somebody else. So that was my intention on taking the flyer. But when I got there, never saw her. I heard stories about kids who were growing up in an environment much like mine and who needed a big brother that could help guide them in a direction. It was then that I recognized what I was doing. I was trying to leave who I was behind and become somebody completely different, which is why I took my suit coat off, because this is not how I dress on a regular basis. This is not who I am, but I figured I had to look professional, especially if it's being recorded. So, although I referred to my brother earlier as a golden child, he had a lot of his own struggles. Yet he was the one that reassured me that no matter what would happen, we would always be there for each other. When I met my ex-wife, it was my brother that would reach out to friends and family that would help us with our wedding. And over the last 22 years, as I left my dream job, separated from my spouse after 22 years, it was my brothers, my family, and my friends from the community who would be there for me. I had always a strong mentor in my brother, and it seemed like a good idea to mentor other kids, and that put me on the path into social services. I enjoyed my time at Project Motivation, and as you can see from the pictures, I had a lot of fun in a much different way. Getting to help young kids, taking them out of the cities, and just doing things that I had never thought I would imagine doing myself. But I will tell you, I met people there that would become lifelong friends and that would change my life. I met somebody there who introduced me to the Bridge for Runaway Youth in Minneapolis, and now just a Bridge for Youth, where I would volunteer and become a residential counselor, again, working with kids that growing up in a similar environment like my own. And it was there that I decided, this is what I want to do. I thought I had my dream job there as a residential counselor. And then as I realized, I can't continue this cycle of just doing one person at a time, I got the opportunity when a community organizing position became available through the Wilder Foundation in the Frogtown community called Weed and Seed. And that's when I decided I wanted to have a much bigger impact. I wanted to do something bigger than just helping the individuals. So almost 10 years after I moved out of the Frogtown community, I was back as a coordinator of the Weed and Seed Initiative, which was a collaborative effort that worked with government, local businesses, nonprofits, and residents, just to name a few, to take back their community. When I took the position, I knew I wanted to play a vital role in the transformation of the Frogtown community, from a safe haven of drugs that it had become to a vibrant, thriving community once again. And I felt because of my connection with the community, growing up there in the heart of it all, that I'd be able to re-energize the folks that have been doing the work for such a long time, especially if I could share stories about like how Ryan Park became, how the businesses used to look, where White Castles used to be. And I bring that up because Julie tried to quiz me on my knowledge of the Frogtown community, and she lost a bet to me, and she still owes me a crave case because she did not know where White Castle was in the Frogtown community, and she's lost that bet. But I thought I could use those stories to re-energize folks and really get them involved in wanting to take back their community. So I knew one of the things that I had to do right away was fix the relationship between police officers and the community, the colors in the Frogtown community. Long before anything that you've seen happening now, back in 2000, I'll never forget being in the basement after a community meeting, and I was in the meeting with who's now the public safety director for the state of Minnesota, John Harrington. He was the senior commander in the Western District at the time. We were walking out of the meeting, and I looked at him straight in the eyes, and I said, "So, John, what are you going to do about drive-by policing?" And he's like, "What do you mean drive-by policing?" I said, "What are you going to do about drive-by policing?" I said, "Your officers just drive through our neighborhood, and they don't stop. They only get out when they have to arrest somebody." He's like, "Well, if you can come up with an idea, why don't you share it with me?" So I sat there for a second, and in the winter of 2000, Shop with Cops was born. Now, the initial intent for the Shop with Cops program was to take kids from the Frogtown Summit University neighborhood, Christmas shopping with police officers. The very first year, we focused on kids K through 6 of age. We wanted to make sure that they were the ones that we targeted because that would mean their family would have to be involved, bringing them down to the community centers to meet with us. And the purpose of the event wasn't to just take the kids Christmas shopping and buying gifts for the kids. It was about giving them money so they could go shopping for their family with a police officer to go out with them, wrap the presents, have lunch. That was the purpose of it. And I'll never forget the first day I did that. We started with 20 kids and 20 officers. I rented the Capital City trolley and a driver drove through the neighborhood. And I will tell you, one of the things I learned right away was that you need to let Target know when you're going to bring 20 kids and 20 police officers into their store. I pulled up with the Capital City trolley with 20 squad cars behind me, and Target was wondering, what the heck is going on? And I'm like going, oh, hey, yeah, we're going to take these kids shopping in here. We're bringing 20 cops with us, too. And they're like, oh, okay. Since then, Target has become a strong partner. It was their foundation for their Heroes and Helpers program. We have served over 3,300 kids, raised over $350,000, had over 1,500 volunteers, and 2,000 officers show up in that 20 years. This is our 20th year going into it. Last year we had 225 kids and 100 officers. And these are the pictures. And by the way, the one on the end there, that's the golden child, my brother. So you can see why he's a golden child. He's a cop. I'm just a doctorate in education. So, so my parents love him. We were recently featured on NBC Nightly News.
But in St. Paul, Minnesota, Santa's helpers are dressed in blue.
No, I think they're right there, dude. Look at all those right there.
So we'll do this Play-Doh.
Shop with Cops pairs children from low-income neighborhoods with police officers.
Hold hands.
Together they go shopping to buy holiday gifts with fundraising dollars, local business donations, and grants.
It's about buying gifts for their family members so they can experience what it's like to share with somebody else so they have that feeling.
This is what I buy for my baby sister.
The program started back in 2000 as a way to improve relations between communities and law enforcement.
It makes me feel good about cops and stuff.
They may have a perception of what police officers are, what they're about, and to have the one-on-one engagement and to see the human behind the badge is really important, not only for our kids, but our officers as well.
Now, 18 years later, the Shop with Cops program is a holiday tradition in at least 25 cities.
Today they made sure that we got to buy stuff for our parents and that we got to have a lot of fun today. Woohoo!
Fun thanks to some unlikely elves, reminding us that not all the joy of Christmas is in receiving.
It really shows you what the true meaning is of being able to give.
We're credited with starting the program in over 25 cities, and the beautiful thing about the program is not a single person gets paid for it. All the money that's raised goes directly to the kids. We have the food donated, all the officers volunteer their time. Target is now a huge sponsor, $5,000 every year that they give us. The rest of it, money is raised through dinners with the chief, lunch with the chief. We have the Midway Chamber of Commerce involved, and you don't think I'm going to get Minnesota United involved this year since they're in the Frogtown Midway technically, but they'll be involved this year, trust me. But that's the program. That's what we did because it was about building relationships. We needed to start changing the perception of the Frogtown community because that was where I started when I came in there, is we had to get people more involved. As you saw earlier, and they heard the crime going on in the Frogtown community, in 1 year alone, there were 2,100 calls to service for narcotic-related crimes at the height of the 90s for drugs in the Frogtown community, or in the St. Paul city. 1,700 of those were in the Frogtown community alone. So when we talk about all the work that I did through the Weed and Seed program, there was other programs that came out of there that we did stuff. One of the other projects that we did was called Operation Sunrise with the St. Paul Police Department.
Tonight, residents in St. Paul have taken an active role in making their streets safer, and they say it's paying off big time with a major drug bust. So far, police have arrested 65 people in the Frogtown neighborhood. It's called Operation Sunrise, a federal initiative that's part of the Justice Department's Weed and Seed program. Police say help from neighbors was the key to putting these people behind bars.
And we have a history here in Ward 1, Frogtown Summit U, of working together with the police, not working against the police, to try to make our neighborhoods a safe and clean place to live.
Police say 30 more drug dealers could be arrested within the next few days. The suspects range from a 12-year-old boy to a 47-year-old man.
What I will tell you is one of the things that they found, they issued 95 warrants for the people living in the Frogtown community, or 95 warrants for drug dealers. Only about 8 of them actually lived in the community when they arrested them. I'm showing you this map because this is what we were dealing with in 2002 working in the Frogtown community. After we ran that initiative, that's what it looked like in less than 2 months as far as narcotic-related crimes in the community. The city of St. Paul actually had to redo its GIS system so it wouldn't make it look like there was absolutely no crime happening anywhere else. We reduced the crime in the Frogtown community in the 5 years that I was running the Weed and Seed Initiative by 33%. Now, I will tell you, there's some bonuses and some negatives to that happening. The bonuses is the community residents were thriving and surviving and living in the community they now loved, but my grant didn't get refunded because we did what we were supposed to do. So as my grant ran out, I realized, I had the practical knowledge to make a difference. And, I didn't get my bachelor's degree until 2002. I graduated high school, spent maybe 2 years at the University of Minnesota, left, and then I went into social services at the Bridge without having a 4-year degree. I got the job as a community organizer without having a degree because of the people I knew. But now here I am, my grant's out. What am I going to do? Do I want to be stuck in this kind of work forever? So I finished my 4-year degree, and I thought, what is the next step for me? What could I possibly do? I want to make a difference. I want to continue to make a difference because I want folks to be able to look at themselves coming out of a community like mine and say that anything's possible. It doesn't make a difference what people say about your community, which is why I was strongly involved there. So, as my time was coming to an end, I was fortunate enough to get a job offer from a friend of mine at the University of Minnesota's Youth Work Institute. I would be their diversity training coordinator there, and while there, I took the opportunity to get my free education and get my master's degree in public affairs and social justice, because I thought if I could learn more about the systems that are governing our lives and really disproportionately impacting folks from low-income communities, especially people of color, why not? So I spent 2.5 years at the University of Minnesota getting my master's degree and almost didn't get it by choice. It's not the place I would have ever thought if I'm going to influence change, I'm going to start at the very school that I'm going to. I'll never forget that first day I'm sitting in a class on race and poverty. Now, here's a little story about myself. I don't speak fluent Spanish, even though I am Mexican. And my grandparents and everybody else are Mexican too. And I always tell folks, yes, I am Mexican. Yes, I know I have light skin. No, my mom didn't cheat on my dad, but thank you for insinuating that. They always get those questions. I always get the questions, well, why don't you speak Spanish? Well, I will tell you, a student, or I should say a classmate of mine at the Humphrey asked me that question. See, we were having a conversation about race and poverty, and the professor there was, I've never really kind of done this kind of conversation in a class environment, so maybe we should have some ground rules. And by that time, I had been doing diversity and equity and inclusion work probably now for about 7-8 years, so I thought maybe I could offer some insight. And I said, you know what? Maybe one of the things that we should do is speak from our own experiences. I said, as a Latino man growing up in Frogtown, All of a sudden, I had this white man right next to me goes, I can't agree with you on that. I'm like, all right, you didn't let me finish my sentence, but I will listen to what you're saying. He goes, where I was at, we always asked one cultural group to speak for or one person to speak for everybody in their cultural group. I'm like going, I know, that's what I'm saying. I said, as a Latino man, and then he started speaking Spanish to me in the classroom. I paused for a second, looked at him, and said, what are you doing? And he goes, what, you don't speak Spanish? I said, I don't speak it fluently, but I understand it. And the next words out of his mouth were, well, what kind of Mexican are you? So the Frogtown in me almost came out. As I was sitting in the dean's office a week later, and yes, for some reason I got called to the dean's office, I told the dean, two thoughts went through my head. I was about to be the Mexican that went old school on you. Instead, I looked at him, I said, I'm a Mexican whose parents, when they came up here in the 70s and enrolled them in a public school system set up by white guys like yourself, were told to only teach them English at home. I said, so I'm a Mexican that's a product of a system set up by white people like yourself. And I thought there I could do a mic drop, walk out the door, boom, be done. No, he persisted to follow me to the front of the classroom and ask me who settled Florida. I did not know we were in a social studies class. And I looked at him, and I'm like, really? This is what we're doing? I said, I'm done. And I walked out the class, thought it was done and over with, didn't think we were going to have to deal with it again. And then the following week came along, and the professor looked at me and said, you know, I think we had an incident here last week that we really didn't address. Does anybody want to say anything? As the class sat silently for a while, and what seemed like for an eternity, with no one responding, I took the opportunity. I began by asking when in an academic environment, let alone in any environment, it is ever okay for someone to question someone's ethnicity and culture. Waiting for a response, I heard nothing. The class sat silently. Disappointed, feeling left alone on an island. I knew I couldn't be in the classroom anymore, so I got up, walked out. Didn't even know if I wanted to be associated with the institution that would allow something like this to happen. So I let my advisor know, you know what, yeah, I know this is my last class in my capstone. I don't think I'm going to graduate. Try having that conversation with your spouse at home. It doesn't go over real well. What do you mean you're 2 classes away from getting your master's degree and you're not going to graduate? What would you tell your kids to do? And then I thought about that long and hard. I thought about it long and hard because I thought about my experience growing up in Frogtown, and I thought about what that meant. And what I learned is you don't walk away from your challenges. You don't walk away from your struggles. You stand there, you face them, and you do what you can to move forward. So I decided to walk across that stage with to get my master's degree. And that, ironically enough, when I was awarded the Paul and Sheila Wellstone Award, you know, from the Humphrey Institute. I don't know if it was for that incident or the community work that I'd done in Frogtown, maybe a little bit of both, but I'll take it. It came with a $500 bonus. I would use that college degree, though, that I got from the Humphrey to get a job at the College of St. Scholastica, where I forever changed Dr. Luker's life. So I love giving her a hard time. I've been doing this since 2007. So it was there that I worked in our School of Education. I said, I worked in community, I worked in residential. I want to work in education and work with those that are educating our young folks. Because I really thought if I could work with teachers who are working in the inner city, and I could talk to them about creating a culturally responsive environment to young folks, then we could all succeed. I struggled in school, not because I was not intelligent. I told you, I had to come home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, raise my younger brother, cook dinner, help him with his homework. So by the time I was done with that, did I really want to do my own homework? And let alone if I was playing any sports, I wouldn't get home till 5:30, 6 o'clock. So I just never bothered to do homework. I never bothered to do anything. I did enough to get by. And I thought maybe if the teachers recognize what some of these young folks are living in, how many of you yourself are raising your younger siblings now or family members and still trying to do what you're doing today? It's not easy. You know, I still adjunct for the College of St. Scholastica, and I wrote the attendance policy for them, which is very strict. But I also tell the students, look, life gets in the way. If you're not healthy and you're not there for your family, your friends, and anything else, then your schoolwork's going to suffer because you're thinking about that. So I always emphasize, maybe if teachers understood that and how life gets in the way, then maybe our students would be much more successful. So I decided I was going to get my master's degree to show that, or my doctorate degree, because I wanted to show folks that is the right way to educate people. Because I used to hear, well, you're not a teacher. You don't know what it's like in the teaching environment. You don't know what it's like in the classroom. And I've been doing trainings for young folks. So I said, you know what? I'm getting my doctorate degree just to prove a point. It was an expensive point as I got my first bill back for my student loans. But I went there, and my dissertation focused on, are we really preparing teachers to teach in a multicultural classroom? I wanted to change the way we educate people, change systems. And I will tell you, the picture right there, when I defended my dissertation, you know how people are supposed to be in an environment like this? I told my chair, nope, not going to do it in a classroom setting. He's like, all right, where do you want to do it? I defended my dissertation in Ryan Park. I went back to the Frogtown community where I grew up, because that's where it all started for me. That's what shaped my educational journey. So I made sure that when I defended my dissertation, that is where I wanted to be. Now, why was Ryan Park important to me? I'm going to play a little video that gets to it.
Change is good.
Yeah, but it's not easy. I know what I have to do, but going back means I'll have to face my past. I've been running from it for so long. Ow! Jeez, what was that for?
It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Yeah, but it still hurts.
The concept, the video, the audio is going in and out. How many of you watched the Lion King clip and seen this before? If anybody knows what it says, he strikes him with the thing and tells him, ow, that hurt. He goes, it doesn't make a difference. It's in the past. And he goes, ah, yes, the past can hurt. And then swings at him again and goes, but you can either learn from it or run from it. And that's what I did. I ran for a long time denying who I was, and I was done doing that. And sitting up here in front of you telling you half this stuff, not easy. It brings up memories that you think you can repress. Defending my dissertation in Ryan Park was important for me because now knowing some of the challenges and struggles, and trust me, I've given you a glimpse, even though you might think there's more there. You don't know half the stuff that I've seen growing up. But what Ryan Park symbolized to me, what Frogtown taught me and represented, is that what was an empty dirt field, with effort from the community, that dirt field became a neighborhood park. And that when that park was overrun with drug dealers and prostitutes, it was a community that fought tirelessly to reclaim its park and its neighborhood. Frogtown celebrated its success, but more importantly, it came together when it faced its challenges and struggles. It was never more evident than 2.5 years ago. That is my Aunt Manny. Growing up with my Aunt Manny, she was full of life. She was there for everything that I ever needed, taking me on the weekends to hang out, living with her occasionally here and there. About 2.5 years ago, in the middle of November, I got a call at 7 o'clock in the morning that my aunt had taken her own life at my grandma's house. I rushed over there from my home in the suburbs as quickly as I could. Family was there. There was a whole lot of squad cars there already. I don't know if they were there because my brother was a St. Paul police officer for the Shop with Cops program that I ran, but they were there. I walked in immediately to see how everybody was doing, and as word quickly spread through the community, people I hadn't talked to in years were stopping by the house, asking how we were. People that I had worked with as community organizers were coming to the house. They wanted to know what was happening, if there was anything that we could do. That's how we did it in Frogtown, plain and simple. We made time for each other, paused what we were doing to listen, comfort in any way that we could. It was that mentality that I brought into my work, that you have to pause, take time, and do what you can for others. And it was evident in the way I ran my teams, because when I went into work that day, to bury myself behind my desk in my job, my team wouldn't let me do it. They came into my office and never left me alone for 2 weeks, because that was the kind of value that I instilled in the work that we wanted to do. And that's what I took from Frogtown Community. So when the committee asked me today to talk to you about my own identity and how I see myself and how I may be an example to you all, and more importantly, how you might relate to my stories, I don't know what specific suggestions I can offer to you. I don't know what I can tell you. All I can do is share my journey with you. I struggled with that so hard, because I will tell you, my community taught me to share my personal stories. Don't speechify, and not wallow there or limit yourself in that lens, but to dig deep into your past, gain perspective, and look at answers that way. You also need to look at the lens that you're looking at the world through. Find ways to help others, find ways to succeed and grow, not to leave our past behind and become someone else, but rather as a means of building upon individual, family, cultural strength, and become a whole person, as we all should. It taught me that you need to be willing to look straight at conflict, confusion, and challenge and examine it thoroughly, not naively or without fear, but with the confidence first in your own head, and then with others' insight, that collectively we can find a way through it. It taught me great ideas are informed by a combination of our past, academic knowledge, others' perspectives, and active learning from ongoing experiences. And to be collaborative and inclusive in your approach, you need to be grounded in who you are and what you want to become. And for me, that's a street march sense with a blend of academic knowledge of what's realistic and what's not at any given moment for people, ideas, and plans. So if you take anything from me today, I encourage you to be informed by the people with whom you have chosen to surround yourself with and interact with, to have a strong, sincere interest in what others teach, have learned, and written about in the academic literature, but not in an unhealthy way. And blend that with commitment, persistence, and sufficient patience, and a deeply held belief about how much difference each of us can make simply by putting our hearts into what we do and who we are, and what we have chosen to do, because that is how one changes the world for the better. We will face our challenges and struggles, but that is not what defines us. Instead, you will be defined by what you have learned and how you've responded to those challenges and struggles. And that's what I want to share with you today. Thank you for having me.